Oh, hi. Hello there. This is Let's Talk About Myths, baby. And I am that host of yours, the woman with all the opinions, Liv. I told you I wanted to go back to the mythological basics. It's been so long since I've dedicated myself to these regular scripted episodes, and I wanted it to be fun rather than horrifying or depressing. And well, as I write that, I don't necessarily think I avoided those topics when picking out our next play, but I do think that we're going to have a blood-soaked ball with this one. And there is considerably less trauma than elsewhere. God. Yesterday I was poking around my translations of plays, because if you can believe it, I have a collection. And I was trying to just find some inspiration. First, Hippolytus came to mind, but the tragedy of that one is just, it's not the time, I think. It's not the time. I will cover Hippolytus eventually, but we just need to be in a better place. But then my eyes fell on one of the most intriguing translation editions that I have. Anne Carson's An Oresteia. See, the Oresteia is, of course, the collective name for the series of plays revolving around the kingdom of Argos after the Trojan War, Agamemnon's return, his death, and his children's vengeance against their mother. But from a historical perspective, the overall concept of the Oresteia, or rather, An Oresteia, is utterly unique. See, this series of events is the only topic for which plays survive from all three surviving tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. So it is the only story where we have the same overall narrative told by all of them. Aeschylus came first, and his trilogy is by far the most famous by a lot. His trilogy is the Oresteia. It's made up of the Agamemnon, the Coryphoi, that's a horrible pronunciation, I think, the Coryphoi, I'm not going to look it up again, or the Libation Bearers, which is the English name, and the Eumenides. So those three plays are typically what we refer to when we say the Oresteia. This is a specific trilogy. It's also the only true trilogy that survives for us to read today. That is, it's the only trilogy of plays which were produced and performed as an intentional trilogy that follows a single narrative. There are other plays where we have three in the same story, but they were they were produced years apart and therefore are not, technically a trilogy. But this one is. And then Sophocles, the tragedian who came after Aeschylus, so he also wrote about my favorite cursed family. His play, Electra, is about the events after Agamemnon's murder. And of course, Euripides also wrote about this family. I've covered that one. He has two plays, though. I think I've only covered one. The Electra and the Orestes, both of which tell somewhat different stories of the same aftermath. Fascinating. But what this means is, unlike every other story featured in every other Greek tragedy, through these plays, we can see how three generations of playwrights spanning almost a century of Athenian politics and life each tell their own versions of this famous, deadly story. And that's what Anne Carson's translation is. So it's Aeschylus is Agamemnon, Sophocles is Electra, and Euripides is Orestes. Three very different plays from three very different time periods, but all about the same mythical family. All of that way too lengthy description later. Today, we are finally diving into Aeschylus's Agamemnon. Years ago, I told you the story of what happened when Agamemnon returned from the Trojan War, but I kind of did it as if it's all of those plays in one story. It was so long ago. I've never actually just covered this play. And this is one of the few non-Euripides plays with female characters that make men shake with fear. And you all know how much I love to make men shake with fear. But we're not only using Anne Carson's translation. She translates very poetically, prioritizing, I would say, performance over the ancient tradition. It's beautiful, it's valuable, but you know I like to have options. So I'm also heavily pulling from Sarah Ruden's translation, among other translations, and the Greek and a bunch of other sources that are listed in the episode's description, because I am me. Most of the quotes, I will say, though, are from the Anne Carson, with a couple very specific exceptions of using the Ruden translation. And I am focusing a lot on this Anne Carson because, I mean, for lots of reasons, but here, this is how Anne Carson opens her introduction, just to give you a sense of why I picked this play and this translation and, like, right now. Quote, "It's like watching a forest fire. Big, violent, changing every minute, and the sound not like anything else. Every character in Agamemnon sets fire to language in a different way." Oh, it's so good. This play may be called Agamemnon, but I do think we all know who's going to be the star of the show. Clytemnestra. And Cassandra, for that matter. "Woman, you speak like a sensible man." Aeschylus's Agamemnon, Part 1. It's dawn in Mycenae, Argos, and the king, Agamemnon, has been away at war for 10 long years. He and all the other men of a certain age sailed across the wide, wine-dark sea, leaving their lives and families behind to wait. And wait. And wait! In Mycenae, a man keeps watch day and night for the signal. He's been assigned there by the queen. His job for an entire year has been to watch from the palace rooftop for fire in the distance. It's this watchman's speech that opens the play and tells the audience where we are, how long it's been, and some of what will come next. Remember, though, the ancient Greek audience would be very familiar with these characters, their story. That's true of all tragedies from the ancient world, but particularly true of this one. So, let's center ourselves just a little bit in the overall timeline of classical Athens, because Aeschylus is early. At least, he is the earliest playwright from the three whose work survives. Aeschylus was about 30 when Euripides was born. They weren't contemporaries, whereas Euripides and Sophocles were. Instead, Aeschylus was the big name that came before them. Aeschylus was the tragedian, this big name writer-director that later tragedians sought to either emulate or comment upon in their own plays. On top of that, Aeschylus had a son who became a tragedian, and actually he beat Euripides and Sophocles like a couple of times, I think, in the competition. So like Aeschylus was really peak. For all I love Euripides, I recognize that for the Greeks, Aeschylus is it. And for a lot of other people too, but Euripides is just Euripides. Still, what this really means is that we don't know much about what plays came before Aeschylus or what he might have been influenced by. Instead, he is just our example of the earliest surviving plays. And so, enter the Agamemnon. But what do we know about the story so far? So you all know how many variations there are in myths and how plays themselves are unique. Plays are one individual person's attempt to depict a cultural story. They, like all authors, choose where to insert their own additions, changes, explorations of character, traumas, whatever. So we don't always know what existed in myth prior to certain plays, or what myths were then instead shaped by plays that preceded them. I say all of this, in addition to the fact that I'm fucking obsessed with all of this, but primarily because it's a little unclear what parts of this story existed prior to this play. The Iliad, of course, introduced us all to Agamemnon, and that is where the majority of the ancient Greek world would have known him from. But in the Iliad, there is little to no information about Agamemnon's background, like his family at home in Mycenae, or specifically one family member that we're interested in here that is never mentioned, or at least the context of, I'm getting ahead of myself, going off script. I'm not going to fix it. We're talking about Iphigenia. Because at this point, I never know how much background to provide or how much you've all retained from my zillions of episodes, so apologies if I'm repeating myself. But Agamemnon is king of Mycenae. Sometimes it's also called Argos because of the plays and the time period. You can just kind of connect those two towns in your head, despite them being two different towns. But we're going to say Mycenae and Argos, referring kind of interchangeably. His queen is, of course, Clytemnestra. Agamemnon's brother, Menelaus, is king of Sparta. Menelaus' wife, of course, again, was none other than Helen, Clytemnestra's sister, and the so-called reason for the Trojan War. And Agamemnon is, though not quite officially, the leader of the Greeks at Troy. Clytemnestra and Agamemnon have a few kids back at home and elsewhere. You'll need to remember who some are. 3 daughters, okay? Iphigenia, Electra, and Chrysothemis. 1 son, Orestes. There are other versions, if we're honest, where there are more or differently named daughters. I'm not going to confuse you all. These are the names we need to know today. Iphigenia, you'll remember, was famously slaughtered by that very father, Agamemnon, in a desperate attempt to bring good winds to sail his ships to war. Women being sacrificed for the violence of the patriarchy. It's something new and different. But here's the important part. Homer's Iliad does not include any reference to Iphigenia being sacrificed at the hands of her father. That's important. Essentially, it means we can't entirely be sure when that part of the story came to be or how. You'll find out quickly where Aeschylus stands in the play, but it's important to remember that we don't necessarily know for sure how widespread this idea was before the play, like how common it was, particularly this detail where Agamemnon killed his daughter for a bit of good wind. Instead, these earliest ideas about Agamemnon ruthlessly slaughtering Iphigenia under this guise of marrying her off to Achilles, this part of the story primarily comes from 2, at least the earliest forms of it, honestly, prior to this play, comes from 2 supremely fragmentary and questionable sources. So the Kypria is a theorized ancient epic that may have told other parts of the story of the Trojan War. There are a lot of people who believe the Kypria absolutely definitely existed and it was all of these things. I don't necessarily, and I also haven't done all that much research because, as far as I know, nothing from the actual Kypria epic survives. Instead, what survives is just later authors talking about what maybe happened in the Kypria epic. So it's not to say it didn't exist or that, this detail isn't more ancient. It's just context. And the other fragment where this comes from is the Echoiai, the so-called catalog of women. Also my latest obsession, but more on that. In the catalog of women, Iphigenia is very plainly sacrificed to Artemis for that wind. So that does bring it back to a fairly ancient point, but not necessarily Homeric. And the same goes for the other woman who needs no introduction for today's episode, but will get one anyway. Cassandra. Now, of course, you all know, unless you arrived here today, in which case, let me tell you about her. Cassandra has to be one of the most famous mythical characters, of all time, arguably. Absolutely one of the most well-known in the West, without question. Off the top of my head, I can name just, at least 2 songs devoted to Cassandra's story. But what is Cassandra's story? And, how did it become what it is? So Cassandra is a princess of Troy, sister of Hector and Paris, and to the modern audience, she is a woman most famous for being simultaneously prophetic and cursed, never to be believed. But Just like Iphigenia, there's actually zero evidence in the Iliad or the Odyssey that suggests that she was understood to be either of those things back then. Cassandra's history is even more lost and fragmentary. Like, prior to this play, which was written hundreds of years after the Homeric epics, Cassandra may have been understood as being prophetic, but this association and the curse of Apollo don't seem to appear prior to this play. Which I won't go into the details of that because Aeschylus is going to give us her story. Okay, that was so much context, I know, I'm sorry, but it's fascinating to conceptualize the background of these stories and to question whether a playwright invented a certain detail or whether it may have originated elsewhere. Like, it's fascinating to understand the history of these stories, particularly when it comes to understanding these types of female characters, those who are both righteous and terrible, sympathetic and horrifying. Which reminds me, the one other thing you need to know about Agamemnon's side of the family is they are cursed. They are so fucking cursed. After a year of watching from the palace rooftop, the watchman of Mycenae is getting a little tired of his mistress's orders, explaining, quote, "This is her stern pleasure, her womanly, hopeful-hearted, man-strong purpose." Our first description of Clytemnestra. She has the hopeful heart of a woman and the thirst for vengeance of a man. Queen Clytemnestra has ordered this watchman to watch for the signal fires that she has coordinated, the fires that will immediately bring news of her husband's return from the war. She has plans for his inevitable arrival. She doesn't want to be surprised. This watchman squeals with excitement. There it is, the signal fire, this official news. Quote, "I'll dance a prelude. My master's luck is reckoned up as mine. The signal fire has thrown me triple sixes. For all that, let me feel, when he comes home, the well-loved heft of my lord's hand in mine." The man is pumped to see his king. Finally, the king of Mycenae is on his way home. The Greeks have been victorious in Troy, and the kings return to their homes as victors, their prizes of war gleaming or crying from their places on the ship. The chorus enters now, singing songs of Mycenae. They are men, a chorus of elderly Argive men, a representation of the men who were left behind in Mycenae, those too old to fight the war 10 years ago, and thus even older now. They, like the watchmen, are so excited for their king's final return. They sing to Clytemnestra. They speak of her excitement at the news that has bubbled over in the city. But what news is it? Quote, "What's happened? What news? What rumor? What message persuades you to send round orders for sacrifice? All the altars in the city, high and low, heavenly and earthly, blaze with offerings. Everywhere torches soot up to the sky, coaxed by holy unguents and royal oils. Tell what you can, heal my anxiety, for it flashes from darkness to hope and chews me up inside." But the queen actually isn't here yet. The chorus still has to remind its audience where and when they find themselves. So the chorus sings of all that led to this war. They say it was for Helen. They're not very convincing. That's okay, though, because it's the story they tell that we're interested in. The chorus sings of how it was that the Greeks sailed for Troy those 10 years ago. Before they ever left the mainland, the Greek ships became trapped by the winds. The chorus sings of the drama of it all, the way the armies languished there, and how, in the end, the prophet, Calchas, gave the news. It's the goddess Artemis who wants to keep us here. The eagle's omens made it crystal clear. Quote, she wants to instigate another sacrifice, a lawless, joyless, strife-planting sacrifice that will turn a wife against a husband. For there lives in this house a certain form of anger, a dread devising, ever-recurring, ever-remembering anger that longs to exact vengeance for a child. But it wasn't a prophecy that named Agamemnon's daughter Iphigenia as this specific one meant to die. He took that one upon himself. Reluctantly, I will concede that, but in the end, the choice appeared easy enough. Agamemnon picked his men, his war, over his daughter, and over his wife. The chorus sings to the audience of their king's actions there at Aulis. Quote, sacrificer of his own daughter he became, to further a war fought for a woman, to pay off his ships, her prayers and cries of father, her young life, they reckoned at zero, those war-loving captains. It goes on, quote, her father said a prayer and bid them seize her high above the altar like a goat, with her face to the ground and her robes pouring around her. And on her lovely mouth, to check the cry that would have cursed his house, he fixed a bridle. Yeah, we just had to take that one in. We had to take that in. But the quote must continue. Anne Carson, don't come for me. It's too good to resist reading all of it. Quote, she cast a glance at each of her killers, like a figure in a painting speaking with her eyes, for she used to sing to them around her father's table, blessing their libation in her pure girl's voice. Here, the chorus cuts themselves off. What happened next, they say, they didn't witness. The prophet Calchas was right, they only say. That, quote, justice tips her scales so that we learn by suffering. So this feels like the right time to remind you all that the United States and Israel sent one of their famously precise missiles and bombed a school filled with young girls learning. Within days of their illegal war on Iran, the U.S. and Israel killed nearly 100 young girls. This has been proven and admitted. The Iranian regime may be terrible, but do not ever let the others convince you that bombing a girls' school is a means of achieving women's rights. They don't care about the women and girls of Iran. They do not. They care about the oil and the Islam of Iran. Do not ever let anyone tell you that the death of children, of girls, is just a necessity of war, when the simple fact is that the patriarchal power structure only cares about women's rights when it can use those rights, those concerns, to oppress non-Western people. They don't care about your rights in the States. They don't care about your rights here in Canada or whether they're going away. They only care when they can bomb the people into quote-unquote democracy. But this is when Clytemnestra joins the chorus on stage in all her righteous matriarchal fury. Have you heard the good news? Clytemnestra announces to the chorus. I like to imagine she's buzzing with excitement. The chorus knows nothing of this good news. They don't even believe her, actually, when she announces that the Greeks have defeated the Trojans in the war, the news that they've all been waiting for so long. The old man thinks she's but a silly woman, just believing in a silly rumor. I'm not a child, their queen reminds them. Troy has fallen. Our warriors sacked it just last night. Well, young lady, what's your proof? The old men drawl, annoyingly, I'm sure. Clytemnestra rolls her eyes. The message was sent straight to me. There's no question. But again, why believe a confident woman when you can question her over and over again instead? What kind of messenger works so fast? The men prod. The god of fire, she bites back. Hephaestus moves that quickly. Are you happy? Clytemnestra was ready for their disbelief. She has the receipts. You aren't strangers to a signal fire, are you? She asks, explaining a concept that they are all very familiar with. Save for when a woman's involved with its planning, of course. The beacons started on Mount Ida, right in Troy itself, she begins to explain. Then the fire passed to Lemnos, then to Athos. Quote, and skimming high above the sea, it shot across like joy, the burning pine torch as another sun to the watcher on Makistos. Clytemnestra continues to lay out, location by location, how the signal fire got from Troy to her in Mycenae just that very morning. Quote, this was my light-bringing strategy. The brilliant idea was hers. Clytemnestra has been preparing for this moment for these 10 long years. Those 10 long years since her husband viciously murdered their daughter. Clytemnestra tells the chorus all she knows, seeming to imagine up the details of the Trojan beaches at that very moment. She describes women falling on the bodies of their loved ones in grief. She even makes a plea for the Greeks not to ravish more than they really need to. Gods know they don't listen to that, though. Clytemnestra speaks, too, of the long journey home that they will all face, all the ways these men might anger the gods on their return. And in essence, she then describes the PTSD that they will almost certainly face once they do finally reach home. And the chorus replies, quote, woman, you talk like a sensible man. And this, I think, will be our theme. What does it mean that Clytemnestra is so very often compared to a man in terms of her words, mannerisms, and actions, and compared to a woman when she does the stuff they don't like? The chorus follows this by speaking of other women, more womanly women than their queen. Helen is given the usual blame for the actions of the men who wanted to possess her against her will. They sing of the other women too, those of Troy and those of Greece, the ones left behind. Quote, Ares who exchanges bodies for gold, Ares who holds the scales of war, sends home to the wife the dust of her man packed in an easy little urn. And the lament goes, what a master of battle he was. These wars of men harm everyone, don't they? The chorus continues, singing of these horrors of war, the unnecessary horrors of war, the men whose bodies are being left behind at Troy now, the grief of the families on both sides. Quote, certainly the gods see all this killing, and the Furies destroy a man who prospers unjustly. They grind his life away to nothing. Dangerous to be big or famous. There strikes the thunderbolt of Zeus. And I'm going to hold on to this one, actually. Like, this might be one of the first times I've found myself just a little keen for Zeus's thunderbolt. The Furies destroy a man who prospers unjustly. They grind his life away to nothing. Ooh, I can think of a few people who fit this description. And actually, a couple of them do indeed appear to be being ground into nothing. Not quite fast enough, though. Shall we make the Furies a little list? Keep them on track. Ladies, 2026 is calling, and we welcome your divine vengeance with open arms. There are an awful lot of dangerous, warmongering, pedophilic, white supremacist men prospering unjustly. Do we need a few names? Finally, a messenger arrives. And no one has ever been happier or more relieved to be home. He's practically kissing the earth beneath his feet. He's professing his thanks before saying anything else. I never thought I'd die here in my homeland, the messenger tells the chorus. I thought the river Scamander would have been my grave. He thanks Hermes, this god of messengers, and proclaims, quote, O royal halls, O beloved roof, O holy seats and gods that face the sun, receive your king with glad eyes at last. He is come, bringing light in darkness, Agamemnon. The messenger's relief really can't be overstated. Things have not been fun for the last 10 years, especially not when you're just an average guy in this war. So, fuck if this man isn't happy to be home. He tells us about their sleeping and living conditions both at sea and during the war. He is not gonna miss any of that. Oh, no. The chorus he's speaking to, though, they don't seem to be as excited as this man himself. They're relieved to have the returning warriors so close to home, but darkness has weighed over them, too, for these 10 long years. While the warriors were away at Troy, they tell the messenger that they, these elder men of Argos, quote, often we sighed from a dark heart. But when the messenger questions why that would be, the chorus only replies, cryptically, quote, silence is the only safe answer to that. And when the messenger presses and questions whether they're afraid of someone, the chorus says just, quote, let me borrow your words. I'm ready to die. Oh, but it's all over now. The messenger just bowls past their worries. He is too relieved to be home. You know, I've been saying all this for a while now, Clytemnestra announces to the men. I've been celebrating since I saw that first signal fire. But, quote, there were, of course, those who rebuked me, saying, you've convinced yourself that Troy is sacked because of a beacon? How like a woman! They called me insane. I like to think she'd laugh here, looking at these men with amusement. They don't need to believe her. Clytemnestra knows when she's right, and she knows what she's doing. She reminds the men that all day, she and the other women of the city have been celebrating this news. She went around with it as an offering, and the women all cried out in happiness at her news. The sound echoed through the town and the temples. Quote, and now? What need for you to tell me more? She raises an eyebrow. I'll hear all I need to know from the king, she tells them. Quote, oh, I'm excited. What day is sweeter for a wife than when she runs to open the door for her husband back from war? Clytemnestra tells the messenger to pass on a message to her king, to tell him that he should come home as quickly as possible, come home to the city that loves him. Quote, you'll find your loyal wife just as you left her, guarding the house like a good dog, enemy to your enemies, quite unchanged. She broke no seal while you were away, and she knows no more of secret sex or scandal than she does of dipping bronze. This is my boast. It's 100% true and worthy of a king's wife. But the chorus and the messenger ignore Clytemnestra completely. The chorus notes only, quote, that's how she talks. You may need an interpreter. But it's no matter. Clytemnestra knows herself. Clytemnestra has a plan. These men chatter on. The chorus wants news of the king's brother, Menelaus. Clytemnestra, standing with her back straight and her head held high, just listens and waits. Oh, nerds. I'll be honest, I'm really excited that I have a new play, and also that it's this one. It's so interesting because, like, I obviously am obsessed with Euripides. I know. Who needs to hear it? But the Agamemnon is one where so many women in this field that I very much respect have really hyped up this play specifically because of the character of Clytemnestra, and I've always trusted them, obviously. It's just more that I haven't had a huge drive to read non-Euripides. But when I was thinking about what play I wanted to do right now, I don't know, this one came out so strong and fast, and I love their Clytemnestra already. I love this. I love how they're focusing on women, how everything seems to be like about Clytemnestra being both manly and womanly, and kind of how the chorus, but how everybody via the chorus like has to navigate that. It's so interesting. Also, like, I mean, the context that we're not really getting here yet, at least, is, I mean, he's been gone for 10 years. We don't get any kind of like concrete information about like logistically what happens, but like these men are gone for 10 years. So whether it's Clytemnestra or Penelope, we have to imagine that at least in some ways, these queens are ruling the kingdoms, right? Like in terms of Penelope, we know that Odysseus left a guy there, but like he was primarily a bard. Like he left a poet to sort of be there with Penelope rather than like rule in his place. Like there's no clarity that like that's the intention, and we know this guy is a poet. So I think that, I mean, and I've been told this in conversations, I won't pretend this is my idea. But like I think that really implies that like the women generally during this period would have been ruling to a degree, and the sort of the poet being there, I would imagine, I mean, I think like at worst an advisor, because the thing about poets, I mean, we know how well respected they were, right? But poets, like the poet in this case of the Odyssey, where we know that's who was left with Penelope, and again, I don't know about Clytemnestra, but they're both so similar in these ways, and like the entirety of the Odyssey is about comparing these two women, so I'm gonna do it now too. But the fact that it's a poet is really, really interesting because it implies history making, right? Myth making. It implies that the poet will be composing a story of this time, you know, but also poets as they were, and like epic poets specific. It's so hard saying poet, but you need to imagine like Homer's, right? Like people with that level of gravitas and cultural importance. These poets, I think, are more like, I do think like as an advisor, that's very sensible, and also like a way of having like a man in the room. But like it does not appear that these women are being overruled. And of course, as we get deeper into this play, like there's going to be an Aeschylus of it all. I won't spoil it for those who don't remember him, but it's great. And so, you know, it's not like Clytemnestra is doing this with no man, but at the same time, like she's so clearly the boss, and it's just, yeah, I mean, I could ramble on forever, but I won't. I am really excited, though, to return to you all next week with another scripted episode of just part 2 of this play. It's nice to get back into some form of regular old episodes. It's been a while. I hope I'm as entertaining as ever. But I really appreciate all of you hanging in, and everyone has said such amazing things, even as I, you know, rage against the hopefully dying patriarchy. I really am appreciative of like the past couple of years have been a lot in varied ways. And I'm just very grateful that I've been able to keep you all entertained in the ways that I have. And I'm just so glad you're all still here. And I'm glad to be back doing this. It's going to fill me with very, very much needed joy and motivation. So thank you all for hanging around and giving me that motivation to keep going. I'm really excited to keep going with this. I'll be back next week on Friday. Anyway, I'm figuring it out. You don't need to know. It's fine. But on last Friday, I spoke with Emily Wilson. Did you listen? Were you obsessed? Was I super not cool and like, whatever? It was so good. It was so good. I'm a nerd for translation, if you haven't been able to tell. And just to say it again, speaking of that, you can find references in the episode's description, but primarily I have been quoting from Anne Carson's translation of Aeschylus' Agamemnon. I think the first quote in the episode was from the Sarah Ruden, but otherwise I generally worked off the Anne Carson, but any quotes are only those two. I've also been referring to the Greek and another translation. You can get the links everywhere. Generally, I'm excited. Thank you all so much. I'm going to stop rambling now. Let's Talk About Myths Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Michaela Panguish is the Hermes to my Olympians, the incredible producer. Select music is by Luke Chaos. The podcast is part of the Memory Collective podcast network and generally the Memory Collective. We have 2 brand new shows today, March 31st, the very first episode of You Are Odysseus is dropping. That is the incredible interactive podcast audiobook by L. Jenkinson Brown based on her book, You Are Odysseus, which is essentially like a choose your own adventure Odyssey, but by that I mean that like you can literally do anything. Like any option that she could have imagined based on the original text. It's in there. It's so cool. It's so beautiful. And we're doing an audiobook. And Laura has, oh my God, you should hear the sound effects. She has like taught herself like sound effects. I don't even know. She's been telling me all this stuff and I'm like, wow, you sound like a magician. I've never. I know you're all going to love it. So check that one out. And then, of course, also check out Ancient History 101. This week, there's also an episode with Laura Jenkinson Brown of You Are Odysseus talking about gods in Greek epic. So there's something for everyone. And next week, we'll be back to just exist in the wonders of Cassandra and Clytemnestra. And spoilers, Agamemnon's going to get stabbed in the back, and I'm ready for it. I am Liv, and I love this shit, and I especially love stories of women getting vengeance against men who have done terrible things.